On Saturday, April 3rd, Yinka Odumakin, journalist, writer, politician, and the National Publicity Secretary of Afenifere, Yoruba socio-political organization, breathed his last. It was the end of an era and the climax of a battle with infirmities, which was worsened by COVID-19, which the family said he was already recovering from. His death shook the entire human rights community, as well as the intelligentsia of the entire Southwest. He was someone who held strong to his convictions. He spoke truth to power and never faltered in his fight for the protection of Yoruba's interests. Odumakin, alongside his wife, Dr. Jo, trudged the nation's human rights terrain like Trojans. The two actually met during their days in the trenches. From the days of the now defunct National Democratic Coalition (NADECO) to when the Alliance for Democracy (AD) was formed. Yinka has always been with the progressives, and this is stayed faithful to until he breathed his last. Odumakin was born on 10th of December 1966 in Muro, which is in Ife North local government area of Osun State. Interestingly, it is the same town where the special advisor to the president on media and publicity, Femi Adesina, hails from. Yinka, as many of the admirers call him, studied English language at the University of Ife, now Obafemi Awolowo University, OAU, Ile-Ife, and graduated in 1989. To show that the fire of activism had been burning since when he was in the Ivory Tower, Odumakin was the public relations officer of the University Student Union. His journalism career started when he was recruited by the Punch newspaper as a reporter, after which he later joined the Guardian newspapers. He resigned from the Guardian in 1993 and established Effective Company Limited, a media and publishing company in partnership with fellow journalist and the former schoolmate Femi Ige. In 2011, he was the head of the media and publicity of the Buhari for President campaign organization, but he later fell out with the now president over his handling of key issues. That shows the fact that Odumakin remained a man of strong views and policy when he was alive. Odumakin said there might not even be 2023 unless certain things were put in place.
It might not even be 2023 in the first place. Well, I've not seen the road to 2023 the way we are going. The new way Nigeria is going now, we can arrive on so many different destinations. But 2023 is very unlikely where we are.
Even in that, those he constantly criticized acknowledged his virtues and values. Among them is APC chieftain and former governor of Lagos State, Bola Tinubu. Overwhelmed, his wife, Dr. Jo, said she wished Yinka could hear and see what those he criticized during his lifetime were saying about him. Yinka was a living encyclopedia of contemporary Nigerian history, and this was attested to by Olawale Olaleye, a journalist and deputy editor of This Day on Sunday, said Odumakin is the mobile library. Mogaji Gboyega Adejumo, a Yoruba leader and a Afenifere chieftain, has this to say about Yinka Odumakin.
Hardly would anyone have thought that at this time and in this particular period of great challenges to the Yoruba nation, that will be mourning the death of a very, very dedicated Yoruba. So it is a very difficult thing for me to do. Yinka Odumakin and I have been friends for such a long time. If I want to put years, I would say for like 15 years. But more importantly, we belong to Afenifere together. And more than just a friend, Yinka was my brother. If there would be a day that would pass in the last 5 years without Yinka and I talking, perhaps such days will be so few and so far apart that it will be inconsequential. On daily basis, we're on the phone or perhaps even visiting each other. There was no national issue we will not discuss. And then, of course, Afenifere. Yinka was a rare gem, a man who would say it just the way it is. You couldn't buy Yinka. And you couldn't bend Yinka as well. When Yinka found out, anytime he found out that he couldn't change the rules, Yinka would bend the rules to suit the Yoruba. He lived for the Yoruba. His whole life was for the Yoruba. Even when Yinka was low in health, his energy was high for the Yoruba. I haven't seen such dedication, such forthrightness, such steadfastness, and such unalloyed support for everything that the Yoruba stood for. And what would the Yoruba stand for? We stand for equity, for equality, for an egalitarian society. Yinka represented all of us. It didn't matter where you belong. And it was that bridge between the young and the old, even in Afenifere. And for me, I will always have to wake up every morning to know that a part of me is gone too. 7 o'clock in the morning, I must receive a call from Yinka. We both went through personal issues together, and we both aided each other. In fact, whenever there was an issue that was so personal to me, the first person I would discuss it with would be Yinka. And Yinka was that person who solved everybody's problem. I've never seen such a human being in my life. And now, Yinka has gone to meet his maker. But I know one thing. He's in a better place where perhaps he even will be more appreciated. Yinka was great in life, but greater in death. The Yoruba nation will have to up their game in making sure that there's no vacuum left, in making sure that where Yinka left the struggle, others are ready to pick up the mantle and go forward. At least we need to do that. And for the generation that is yet to come, there was a time in history that a Yinka Odumakin walked on this earth and stood tall, and stood for his conviction, and stood for the Yoruba, and lived his life for the Yoruba. Let that be a lesson to each and every one of us. Good night, my brother. Good night.
Talking about Comrade Yinka Odumakin, it's actually very difficult to pay him a tribute right now because I'm still struggling with the fact of his passing. And it was a rude shock to me. I didn't even know he was sick until the morning of his passing when the news came to me, and I quickly had to make some calls to be sure, and it was true. At that point, I was really devastated, and I kept asking myself, how could we have lost such a man? He was somebody I called a human library. The amount of information at his disposal, you won't believe it. He had so much, in his head, and that he would lose such a person, sad. He believed in Yoruba, in the Yoruba cause, but importantly, he believed in one Nigeria, and everything he ever sought for, everything he ever everything he ever wanted, everything he ever was praying happened in his lifetime was to have a Nigeria in which all the ethnic groups would find their placing, within appropriate measures, and that no one will feel inferior to the other or subservient to the other. He actually genuinely fought for a beautiful Nigeria, which unfortunately didn't come to pass in his lifetime. I'll certainly miss him. He was a very strategic person. He was well read. He had ideas, beautiful ideas, and all of that had gone with him. It's sad. I pray his family would be able to live or cope with the untimely passing. I'll miss him certainly. Good night, my dear brother. Bye.
In death, he remains an icon. Fare thee well, a true son of Oduduwa.